Coach, congratulations again on a terrific year. Another state title for the Skyhawks, and I know that this was a special group of kids. And I want to start this out kind of by asking you, after having a little time to reflect, we all knew that this wasn't your most talented group, yet it was so productive, went undefeated. Talk a little bit about, after you've had a little time to think about this club and let it all sink in, kind of what your feelings are about that group.
Yeah, they're very much the same after the championship. It was just amazing to be around it. And it's very rewarding as a coach to watch a group of young men come together and really rely on each other and put their egos aside and get something done that no one really expected them to do. And so they exceeded all our expectations, and more than anything, it was just a lot of fun to watch.
We all know that skis, and I think it's become common knowledge, not just those on the inside, that the caliber of athlete and the depth of good players has increased dramatically in the last 10 or so years when you've had your run of 7 titles in 9 years. What is the key in overall? I know there's several factors, but what is the key in addition to having, obviously I know you've got great support from the school, and this school is all about excellence, but still there are other schools that attempt to do that. Mm-hmm. How do you continually win championships and be so successful over such a long period of time? What do you think the key is?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on the environment first. You have to have support. I know some really good football coaches that have been in situations where the support's just not there. And you're not going to win in an environment like that. So, number one, we have that here. I think we try to maintain a sense of urgency. We never really buy into our own press clippings. We're messed up people, and we're every year as coaches we reevaluate how we did things and how we can get better. Mm-hmm. So I think that sense of urgency goes a long way.
All right. I want to ask you about a couple of issues that are kind of hot topics right now. And there's nothing hotter, obviously, in football than the concussion issue.
Sure.
And it seems as if it's gone to the point now where perhaps it's even a little overdone or overblown. It's almost in vogue now to kind of have a knee-jerk reaction and say, oh my gosh, if you play football, you're inherently going to have brain damage. And I'm certainly not doing anything to take away from the fact that there have been concussions, there have been lots of effects that have been felt by veteran former NFL players later that claim they can't function now, and in many cases can't. But in reality, just talk a little bit about how bad or maybe how overblown the situation is without taking away at all from the fact that there are some very serious situations.
Yeah, first and foremost, it's something that as a coach you have to take very seriously. And I'm thankful that we know more about it than we did even when I played. And so it's something that we have protocols for, we take very seriously. I think right now the science is still evolving. We're not exactly sure on every front what happens. But we do know that the people that are having these issues later in life typically are these people that have played football well into their 30s, mid-30s, NFL football players that have had repeated concussions. Much like a boxer that continues to get hit in the head, there's going to be some damage maybe from a career like that. The science that's come out recently, I know Purdue University did a study, and there's another one out there that suggests that kids that just play high school football have zero increased risk of any long-term neurological damage. And you can look at the study for yourself. I think Purdue University was the one that did that. Mm-hmm. So I think that, there's risk in life. This, to me, might be an issue more about control than it is about actual science. My children ride their bikes, and they're at risk to get hurt. And in fact, riding your bike is much more dangerous than playing football. So sure, do you take on an added increase of risk when you play football? You probably do, of course, but you do that with any activity, physical activity that you come across. So I think that if I'm a parent, I have 3 children, I have 1 son, and I feel very, very comfortable with letting him play football. Now, and I've said this before, it's safer than ever to play football because we're more aware of these things. Coaches have to be educated on it. We are studying the science for ourselves too, and so right now, I think that in the helmet technology and all those kind of things, it's safer to play high school football than ever. So I would recommend anybody to play high school football.
You haven't said that. The analogy that comes to me is when you talk about, yes, NFL players because of how long they play, but even more so I would think, but the fact that they are the biggest, strongest, fastest men alive, going at each other full speed for an entire game over and over and over, as well as practice. And it kind of makes me think it's kind of like perhaps like driving a car. If you go out and drive a car 120 miles an hour every day you drive, you're going to be at a lot bigger risk than if you go out and you drive normally.
Sure. And I think the body heals too. And the younger you are, you remember you healed a lot quicker than we do at our age now. So I think that's one thing to consider too, is that young people bounce back quicker. And I think, if I was a 16, 17-year-old kid with multiple concussions, I would reconsider playing a sport like. And football gets kind of the brunt of all the criticism, but it's in soccer, it's in other sports as well that we're having to deal with it. But at the end of the day, as a coach, it's our job to look out for our kids' safety, and we certainly do that here.
Have you seen any instances, or even maybe it's among friends of you and Erica, have you seen an increased amount of parents, whether the child is 4 or 5 or 12, 13, 14, say, you know what, I'm not going to let my son play football, period? Have you seen that yourself?
No, I have, but you know what, I also see less kids that play outside now. Or less kids that play in the street, whatever game it may be. I think it's a product of the 24-hour news media. We are a more anxious culture than ever because we're more aware of the bad things that can happen. You may read about a situation of a child being injured in Wyoming that's completely absurd when it comes to, statistically speaking, it happening to your child. But we're aware of those things, and I think you see a very, very anxious culture of parents nowadays, and so we see that in football too.
All right, I want to also ask you about, there's been a lot of talk recently, and it seems like this is somewhat cyclical. Back when you and I were younger, it was kind of given that if you were a good athlete, you'd play everything, and the general thinking was, it was part that it's good for you to play different things, and the other part was that each sport helped you and others. And then it went through a period, I would say in the last 10 years or so, where everything became real specialized. You either were a basketball player or a football player or a baseball player, exceptions of course, but in general. Now I've read a couple of reports, studies that have been done that indicate a swing the other way, that the mindset is now that no, you're going to be more successful socially, athletically, in every way by playing as many different sports as possible. What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much common sense. I know I played all 3 sports in high school, and every time I went from football to basketball, basketball to baseball, baseball back to football, I was very sore. So I was using different muscles. And so you're strengthening different muscles, you're working different muscles. Also, these kids that specialize tend to have injuries earlier in life. You have 16-year-olds having Tommy John surgery because they're playing AAU baseball all summer long, or whatever it may be. I think that if you're young, enjoy all the sports you can. My best sport was baseball until I was a senior in high school. And that year I did really, really well throwing the football, and football became my future. So you just never know. I think you keep all your options open, particularly at a school here like Hammond. We want our kids to participate as much as possible. And I would encourage any parent out there to expose their children to as many sports as possible, and then and see what happens.
Yeah. I want to ask you one last thing. Being a former quarterback for the Gamecocks, I know you still somewhat keep your eye on the program and still have a lot of friends over there. Obviously, this is kind of uncharted territory. They're in a spring practice with an absolutely no proven quarterback. There's a lot of concern. When you look at the depth chart, it doesn't look as strong as it has in recent years, coming off a subpar season. 2 things. Have you heard anything, as they say, from what's going on at spring practice? And overall, what's your view of the fact that a lot of folks think that that things are getting kind of tough again at South Carolina?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard much about the quarterback situation other than the latest, I guess, Nosevich is transferring. And I'm not sure he was going to factor in a whole lot anyway. But, I think it's something that's going to be a challenge to Coach Spurrier to construct an offense, around a younger quarterback. And I think it's kind of a wait and see. It doesn't, even in practice, if you perform really, really well, it's different when you get on that field and there's 85,000 people screaming, there's an ESPN camera in your face. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I know they have the Cooper kind of wild card that they might have to play a little bit more, much like Kentucky did this past year. And that might be something that we see more of. But, I think last year took everybody by surprise. And particularly, the struggles on defense. So I think that if we can get our defense back to where it was a couple years ago, we'll be able to afford a little bit of time for those quarterbacks to develop.
Last thing, when does spring practice get started, and are you looking forward to that?
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm getting kind of antsy to get out there. So we start in mid-May. We try to give our guys as many time, the baseball, lacrosse players, as much time as possible to get out there. So we're looking forward to seeing what kind of team we have. And spring ball is laid back because you're not preparing for a game, and we kind of rolled the balls out and see who can play.
Coach, great as always. Great catching up with you, man.
Thanks for having me.